All right, everybody. Welcome to the Typical Sportsman podcast. As promised on social media, I'm here with Jim Heffelfinger, and we're going to talk dire wolf, which is on the rave right now for good reason. Actually, I mean, what they're claiming gives it good reason to be on the rave right now. So
that's right.
We're going to break that down from a scientific standpoint and talk about what is really happening with this dire wolf thing. And then we talk about some other thought-provoking conservation questions about what it's like to be a true conservation-minded sportsman. It's an incredibly informative episode. I've been wanting to have Jim on for a couple years. We had this teed up a couple years ago. Some stuff happened, but now we're here at the 34th Biannual Pope and Young Convention, and it's time. This episode is brought to you by my good friends over at ScentLock. ScentLock, for me, what really sets them apart is the activated carbon for maximum odor absorption. If you're a whitetail hunter, you know the importance of controlling your scent. So go check out ScentLock for, in my opinion, what is the best whitetail gear one can buy.
For the true sportsman, it's more than a pastime. It's a way of life. Embrace the lifestyle of hunting, fishing, and the thrill of the wild. Live the life. Be typical.
I have had a long-time love for Garmin products, and for good reason. When it comes to smartwatches, when it comes to GPS wearables and handhelds, when it comes to devices to stay in touch with my friends and family when I'm off-grid, there's just simply nobody that can compete with Garmin. Here's the best part. They make something for everybody in every price range. So whether you're looking for something like the Instinct, which is one of my favorite watches of all time, it's incredibly well built. It is priced phenomenally, but it is also just as tough as nails. You could throw that thing through a meat grinder and it's going to come out just like the day you bought it. All of that, and it still offers me all of the GPS features that I need when I'm on the mountain, still offers me all of the cool smartwatch features that I want when I'm in the office or at the gym or tracking my sleep habits. And then you move up to something like the Tactic series, which has ballistics built into it. It's got lights built into it so that you can use it as a flashlight around camp. It has full color GPS maps. Guys, Garmin has something for you. And then you move on to something like the InReach, which is the best thing that you could ever have to stay in touch with friends and family when you're off grid. Let me tell you something. Mama likes getting text message when I'm on the mountain just to tell her that I'm safe and that I love her. But it also gives her an incredible peace of mind knowing that that little device in my hand, if something were to happen with the touch of a button, I can let her know where I'm at. I can also alert rescue teams to let them know where I'm at. Guys, I literally trust Garmin with my life. And then as far as the bow shop goes, they make the best chronographs that you could ever get your hands on. Guys, here's what I'm going to tell you. Whether you're looking for a new wearable to just get smart notifications when you're in the office, or a new wearable to track your sleep habits and your workouts in the gym, or whether you're looking to go off-grid with full-color GPS maps, Garmin has a wearable for you. They also have a full line of handheld GPS and devices to stay in touch with friends and family. Guys, go check out Garmin.com because I have never one time went wrong with the Garmin product. All right, Jim, before we really jump into this, you've got a big old long introduction here.
I do. So we're
here,
a
lot of history.
We're here to talk about the new Pope and Young category, the dire wolf. Is that what we're talking about?
We are going to talk about the new, hopefully new,
good
Javelina
category.
I hope
so we can
Pope and
talk
Young.
about that.
That is why you're here, in fact.
About that.
Yeah.
That's right. Yep.
So give us an introduction to yourself, man.
Sure. Well, I'm Jim Heffelfinger. I'm the Wildlife Science Coordinator for Arizona Game and Fish. I've been with Arizona Game and Fish for 33 years. First 23 years of my career was as a regional biologist. And so I was directly involved in the surveys of game species and the prescribing proper sustainable hunts. So just as a regional biologist in the Tucson region, I'm still in Tucson, but switched over about 10 years ago to be kind of a science advisor to make sure that the decisions we make, the policies that the agency makes are well-grounded with a good scientific foundation.
But you're also can I say world-class pistol shooter? Is that?
No, I would not say world-class because all those people that beat me would probably
one of the
disagree with
best
you.
pistol shooters in Tucson. That's what.
Well, I don't know. I don't know about that either, but I do. For the last 30 years, I've enjoyed competitive pistol shooting, IDPA, USPSA, and steel matches, and that's just my hobby. That's what I really like to do outside of the kind of the science stuff.
And we really might get into this. I don't know yet if we're going to take a deep dive into it, but we had Chris Parrish and Neil Thaggart on to talk about the non-lead, North American non-lead partnership.
Yep.
And you have a little bit of a different take on the human consumption of lead.
I wouldn't say different. I don't think they disagree with, the information that I have, the science that I have, that it's really consumption of game meat that's been shot with lead is really not a human health hazard at the levels that hunters consume that. Some people cite some research or cite some cases, but they're always very unusual cases. They're like some kid that gets into a handful of pellets from dad's reloading bench and eats a handful of pellets, or some crazy New Zealand guy that's eating bush meat and no vegetables, but meat every day shot with lead.
It's been shot.
You really pretty much have to consume metallic lead more days than not, like every other day, in order to elevate your blood lead levels to any level that science would be worried about. So a lot of people that talk about consuming game meat that's been shot with lead, they go immediately to the information in the medical literature about lead poisoning in children and lead paint chips and leaded gasoline. And those are very different sources of lead. They're organic lead compounds that are highly absorbable and very damaging and very easy to get in your bloodstream. Consuming a number 8 lead pellet from a shot quail or dove once in a while is not a human health hazard. That's kind of overblown in a lot of cases.
So I got stabbed one time. Grew up in the ghetto, Van Buren, Arkansas. Just kidding. It's about as white as you can be. But I did get stabbed one time in elementary school with a pencil in the back, like just somebody being funny, and I remember my teacher freaking out, like saying he's going to get lead poisoning. He's going to get lead
graphite
poisoning.
powder that's compressed.
And I'm like, just because we call it pencil lead. Anyways, he's going to get lead poisoning. I still do have a black little dot on my back. Some 25 years later. Yeah.
That's your tat.
That is my tat. And I just thought that was funny. Anyways.
But even gunshot victims, there's cases where gunshot victims where they leave the lead bullet inside, and especially if it's near a joint, that can elevate your blood lead levels, sometimes to dangerous or unhealthy levels from leaving that bullet in your system. But that's what it takes. It takes metallic lead to be in your system or in your digestive system for a long period of time, because it's metal. It does not dissolve very fast.
Right.
Even in an acidic stomach, your food's moving through in 24 to 36 hours. It's moving through your whole digestive system.
Right.
Anybody that's eaten corn on the cob knows that. But it's about 5 or 6 hours and it's through your stomach. So there's not a lot of time for metallic lead to actually dissolve. And that's at the heart of why it's not really a serious health issue.
Right. Now, for those of you who, and I honestly, I don't know what order we're going to put these out in. So I don't know if Jim's is first or last, but we had Chris Parrish on and Neil Thaggart on, North American non-lead partnership. And we talked about the importance of knowing your ammo, knowing how much lead you're leaving behind, knowing the damage that causes even after you're long gone. You've done everything ethical. You've done everything by the law. You've not broken any laws, and you've not even intended to do anything bad. But because you left a gut pile that could have lead, you've now intentionally poisoned raccoons, coyotes, birds, anything that would come eat that carcass. Now there are, and they reference a study that shows the lead that gets into your packaged meat and how, anyways, that was the whole conversation.
Yep.
And I think you would agree with this. I think our job as sportsmen, our job as outdoorsmen, is to inform people on the knowledge of this and then let them make a conscious decision.
Right. And that's always been the non-lead partnership is providing information, letting people make personal decisions, because it is a personal decision. If you've got, say, a widespread species like red-tailed hawk and lead left over in carcasses like that amount to, which the data shows, a really small percentage of annual mortality from a population level, that's a decision you want to make. Does that bother you that you might kill an individual red-tailed hawk and it doesn't really affect the overall population? And we talked about this recently at the North American Conference, which is all of North America getting together, and I'm on it. Chris and Leland Brown are always there at the Lead and Wildlife Committee, and I'm a member of the Lead and Wildlife. It's a working group, actually. And I gave a presentation about why regulatory bans on lead ammunition is not the way to go. That we can work as the non-lead partnership is doing with the volunteer efforts in Arizona, because we have the condors, which is a serious lead issue. And that's where Chris started his career off. But in Arizona, since condors is so important, we've had this very intensive voluntary program that hunters either use non-lead ammunition, or if they choose to use lead ammunition, make sure that those gut piles to come out of the field and they're not left in the field. And we have 85 to 90% compliance by people hunting in the condor area of either non-lead ammo or taking that out of the field. So that's a real great example of how a voluntary program can be very successful.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, and I told you when we talked, you said, what do you want to do a podcast on? And I said, dire wolf. Because if you have the privilege of being friends, I've sent him a friend request like 100 times. He's never accepted it. I'm just kidding. If you have the privilege of being a friend of Mr. Heffelfinger on Facebook, he can get into it with people over the dire wolf. And so Justin, and I'm a curious mind. I'm not by any means intelligent. I'm just going to go ahead and tell you that. I grew up with a basic education from Arkansas. Got a bachelor's degree in ministry, which doesn't really help you in conservation. But I was telling Justin, these things that are put out for the average Joe are so hard because they make it sound like the gospel truth. And you're like, this is so cool.
They speak in absolutes.
And so Monday of the convention, my wife sends me a picture and she says, what is this? Like, I want to hear about this. And I'm like, well, let me just ask Justin. And so I take it to Justin and he was like, Jim Heffelfinger, you need to talk to him.
Because he just saw my post probably.
And he showed me your post. And so when you said, what do you want to do a podcast on? I said, I really want to dive into this. I really want to talk about this.
Yep.
Before we get into it, I did say we're at the 34th Biannual Pope and Young Convention. So you're going to hear the sight and sounds of the convention in the background. You might see some giant trophies. You might see some goofuses walking by. That's all right. We're here to talk about the dire wolf. Now, when this information surfaced, what was the first thing that comes through as a science-based conservationist? What's the first thing that crosses your mind?
That those aren't dire wolves. That you
Plain
can't,
and simple.
Yeah, right. But that was my first reaction. So then I had to dig in and kind of look like, well, what did they do? Why are they saying this? And the more I looked into it, the more I understood about it. But they're not dire wolf. Bottom line.
So what are they?
And so to provide some background, it's called Colossal Biosciences. It's this $10 billion corporation that works with genetic engineering in a lot of cases. So they came out with the news, which probably everybody globally that's near any kind of electricity has seen the news, that they produce these 3 dire wolf pups. And they keep calling them dire wolves. They don't hedge. There are no caveats about they may not be all dire wolves. They just flat out say they're all dire wolves. And then when you read more and more of the information, and one of my first reactions too was a paper just came out about four years ago where they got some DNA out of some old dire wolf specimens, and they compared that DNA with gray wolves, and they came to the conclusion that dire wolves were very different than gray wolves. They weren't, as everybody thought, they were just like a bigger form of gray wolf. And the genetics showed they were very different from gray wolves. And so my first reaction was, well, the peer-reviewed science indicates that you can't just take dire wolf DNA and it's not the same as gray wolves. But then the more I looked into it, that paper was published about 4 years ago. They used genetics. It seems like this Colossal group, Colossal Biosciences, they went back and they got that same DNA. And I think they've got some additional DNA, but they were certainly able to get a better, what they call coverage, a better analysis of that DNA. And so I suspect the problem is you've got peer-reviewed paper, the paper 4 years ago, that says that dire wolves are very different from gray wolves. And then you have Colossal coming out recently and saying dire wolves and gray wolves are 99.5% similar. So those are very different answers, and they're both based on genetics. So how do you wade yourself through that stuff? And when we looked
I told you'll see the sight and sounds of Pope and Young. You've got Miss Lana here. That's our raffle girl for the week. Go ahead.
Yeah. So Colossal saying that the dire wolves and gray wolves are 99.5% similar, which is really in conflict with the latest peer-reviewed scientific literature. And so my first reaction was, well, I'm going to go with the peer-reviewed scientific literature, not what Time Magazine says, not what this $10 billion company says, because this company, they do a lot of cool genetic stuff, but they don't publish in the scientific literature. That's not their model. It's their idea to do cool genetic stuff, and it's not their idea to sit down and write scientific papers. Well, that's kind of a problem when you're a scientist, because you have something that's peer-reviewed, that other scientists have reviewed and has been published, and then you have something this company is just saying in Time Magazine.
Yeah.
And so you're inclined to go with the peer-reviewed science, but you have to be careful not to dismiss what they're saying, because they've got some great geneticists working with them. And I think eventually they will publish some of this stuff. And I have a feeling that they're going to be correct, that this latest information shows that gray wolves and dire wolves are very closely related. But they say 99.5%, and that makes you think, wow, they're almost the same. But you've got to think that humans and cows are 80%. Share the 80% of the same DNA, and chimpanzees and humans, they share 98.8% the same DNA. So you can't be like, you've got to keep that in perspective when they say dire wolves and gray wolves are 99.5% the same. So I think what's going to come out eventually is they're probably going to be able to support that. They probably have done better genetics than that paper 4 years ago. And in fact, one of their main geneticists, Beth Shapiro with Colossal, was a co-author on that paper 4 years ago. She was involved in that research. That's what leads me to believe. I think they probably, even though they're not published, they probably are right about that a closer relationship. And it was.
Do you think it's to the extent of 99%, or do you think it's?
Well, I think that's their estimate. They don't look at the whole genome, so they can really compare all wolf genetics and all dire wolf genetics. They just have samples, and the samples tell them 99.5%. And when that paper came out a few years ago and said that dire wolves and gray wolves were completely different evolutionary track, it said that dire wolves probably evolved in North America and South America. And the gray wolves, of course, we know came from the old world. They came over the Bering Strait and invaded North America. And so they were saying they were so different. And at the time, people said, that's odd, because when you measure and analyze the skulls, they're very similar. The dire wolves and gray wolves are very similar. There's some differences, you can tell them apart, but they're very similar. So at the time, people thought that genetic information sounds a little odd, because why would their skulls be so similar? That's what leads me to believe that this new Colossal data saying that they are very closely related is probably true, because the skulls kind of support that too. But that doesn't mean they're dire wolves. So you look into like that half of that 1%. And what they've said was that they've looked at the DNA from dire wolves. They looked at the DNA from gray wolves. They found 20 genes that appear in a few dire wolf specimens. They don't have a good sample size. They have a few genes that appear in dire wolves and don't appear in gray wolves. So they said, aha, those are dire wolf genes, because they don't appear. And so they've replicated those genes. They've replicated that sequence, and they've inserted them into the genome of a gray wolf. So they've taken a gray wolf genome, they've replaced those, they've taken out those gray wolf genes at
the
that
ones
position.
that are different.
And they've inserted the dire wolf gene in that position. And so they've inserted, but they had 20 genes they determined were dire wolf specific. They were only able to they only able to replicate 14 of those 20, because a few of those dire wolf genes, when they tried them in a gray wolf genome, they caused blindness and no hearing. And so that tells you that what they have is not dire wolves, because
we have a Helen Keller gray wolf.
Yeah, they could, but that's why these are not dire wolves. There's some dire wolf genes that they couldn't use because they cause blindness and stuff. That right there tells you that these are not dire wolves. And so when you think about, so they only differ, dire wolves and gray wolves differ by 0.5%. They've inserted they've replicated 14 dire wolf genes in the gray wolf in there. And when you do the math, a gray wolf genome is 19,000 genes. And so 0.5% is like 95 genes. 95 genes is 0.5% of a full gray wolf genome. And if you say there's 14 dire wolf genes out of those 95 that differentiate them, you're still at a maximum of 15% dire wolf. So what percent are these, being generous, what percent of these little white pups dire wolves? The maximum they can really be, according to my math, is 14% or 15% dire wolf. So they shouldn't be saying they're dire wolves if they're only 15%.
So basic redneck breakdown of this, in my simple mind, is we look at something and it says, okay, it's only 0.5% off. If we remove that 0.5% and plug it in with the other 0.5%, we will create the dire wolf.
Yeah, but it's not 0.5 because it's half.
Correct.
But it's small percentage. And if you've got those little white puppies that are 15% dire wolf, you can't breed them together and concentrate and
white?
make a full dire wolf.
Why are they white? The dire wolf was.
That's a good question. Yes, because the dire wolf lived throughout the Pleistocene and died out about 13,000 years ago.
Yeah.
And so with the death of all these big megafauna, all these big animals, and that's probably why this big predator died out too. It died out about 13,000 years ago. And when you look at the fossil record, there's a lot in Florida. There's a lot in the southern United States. There's some throughout the United States. There's some fossils in Western South America. But then you get up to Canada, and there's just a few fossils in extreme southern Canada. So people think of the dire wolf as this giant Canadian, the Arctic thing, especially since they're white, this big Arctic thing. But they weren't. They were a southern United States,
and there's no
Mexico.
other animal in the United States that's white.
Right. So think about why would the southern wolf in South America and Mexico and the U.S. be pure white like some kind of Arctic animal? There's no other large carnivore or large animal in South America or North America that I can think of that's pure white. So the fact that it's white doesn't make a lot of sense to me. They were celebrating the fact that it was white. In fact, one quote said, "When we saw the word white fur, we knew we had it. We had it right." But there's nothing that says that dire wolves had white fur. So that seems strange to me. And it also seems very coincidental that a white dire wolf matches exactly Jon Snow's dire wolf ghost on Game of Thrones. And that actor that played Jon Snow is actually a financial contributor to Colossal to this project.
So they went off pop culture to say we got to make it white.
There's too much pop culture connection nexus with this for me to be comfortable. And then the third one of those white pups, wolves that they produce that they say are dire wolves, they've named after a character in Game of Thrones. So there's this connection between pop culture and science in this case that makes me a little uncomfortable about why those wolves would have been white. It just seems like too much coincidence that it matches Jon Snow's wolf in Game of Thrones, and they took the puppies over there to him as a contributor, and he apparently started crying when he saw these quote dire wolves and was excited. And so they took big photo op, took a lot of pictures with the Game of Thrones actor, and all that smells a little fishy to me.
So, and let's just retract just a little bit, because what they are doing is incredibly impressive.
It is. Yeah, there's no doubt the geneticists that are working there, they're top notch. They're not a bunch of hacks. They're not a bunch of idiots. They're top notch geneticists.
We are not taking away from what they did.
Right. They're doing amazing, amazing things. I'm really excited about things they're doing, but you can't call an animal that's 15% dire wolf a dire wolf unequivocally. So I'm excited about everything up to the point where they start talking about releasing some of these engineered animals into the wild. And so they're working very hard on woolly mammoths. And
that opens up a whole nother slew of questions for me. Before we get into that, is there any reason to do this other than publicity? I mean,
I think yes. I think the reason I think what they're doing, they're making this big splash with "We made dire wolves," which they didn't. They're making the big splash about we're working on recreating the woolly mammoth, and they are. That's another project. They're trying to create the woolly mammoth. They've got some woolly mammoth DNA. They found out the woolly mammoth is most closely related to the Indian elephant out of anything else on the planet. Okay. So they're working with the genome of the Indian elephant. They've isolated the gene that creates golden woolly fur that they think is the gene that did that in the woolly mammoth.
So what you're going to have is a golden woolly African elephant.
Well, first mice, they inserted and they replicated that gene that causes this long golden fur in mice, and they produce woolly mice. And you can go on this a couple months ago. You can go on the internet, just type in woolly mice, and you'll get a picture of these big, fluffy, long-haired, woolly, golden mice. And they say that is because they replicated that woolly mammoth hair gene in the mice. And so they made a big splash about that. But you're right. Their pathway to bring the woolly mammoth back is really to bring back a furry Indian elephant. and it's going to be mostly an Indian elephant, like the dire wolf,
like the quote unquote dire wolf,
with some phenotypic characteristics, like physical characteristics, like big long golden fur. And so you think, well, how can they say this? How can they say something that's 15%, and they know it's 15% dire wolf? How can they say that that's a dire wolf? And when you listen to them or you see their quotes, the geneticists there, like Beth Shapiro, is quoted as saying, well, we're using the morphological species concept, which means in their definition that if we create an animal that looks like something, like a dire wolf, we create an animal that looks like a woolly mammoth, then we've created that animal. But the genetics speak otherwise. And the pathway to get there, you haven't created a dire wolf. You haven't created a woolly mammoth. You've created something that looks like it. But we have dog breeders that through the centuries have taken a gray wolf and made a poodle, and have taken a gray wolf and make a chihuahua. So by selective breeding, you can certainly make a wolf into something else very dramatically different. So not all that exciting that we've got someone taking a wolf and making it just a little bit bigger wolf with white fur. That seems even less amazing than making poodles. Poodles should be the big news these days.
Yeah.
So that what they call the morphological species concept, if we make something that looks like the species, then it is. There's not many ecologists or evolutionary biologists that would agree with that. It's not that. It's just something you bred to have physical characteristics.
That's like saying I went to the beach and got a tan. Now I'm Mexican.
That's right. Phenotypic characteristics.
Now, going back, because you said the introduction into the wild, and I don't know that have they said that it's their plan to reintroduce the dire wolf into the wild?
They've said that they're in discussions, and that's something that they're discussing. And they've said they're even having discussions with some of the indigenous tribes in North America. North Dakota. They're having discussions with some tribes in North Dakota who have expressed interest in having dire wolves released on their property. So they're making statements like that, which would be, if you look at that reservation, it's a fort. I forgot what the reservation's called. If you look at it, it's about the size of a county in North Dakota. So think about like recreating dire wolves or something that looks like dire wolves and then releasing them in one county in North Dakota. I mean, that makes no sense at all, but that is what they're saying. They're talking about being in conversations with these indigenous tribes about possibly releasing. They've talked a lot about if they can create a woolly mammoth or something that looks like it, like a furry Indian elephant. If they could release that engineered woolly mammoth looking thing into the Arctic, it would improve the ecosystem.
Would it survive?
That's the kind of things that they're saying. I hope not. I mean,
realistically, though, if all you've done is added the genome for the fur,
but it's furry now.
It's furry, so it can survive in the Arctic.
I don't know.
I mean,
you think about his diet. Like what kind of food is
Right.
it going to be looking for if it's used to being in India and Indonesia, and now it's in the Arctic looking for food? So all this is just, those are details that nobody wants to talk about. They're talking about these these amazing things.
But it's got a jacket on, so it can.
But you've got these. I mean, those ecosystems are gone for the woolly mammoth. The
Right.
ecosystem for dire wolf is long gone. That was the
Right.
United States and Mexico, and so you're bringing these animals back to what? The ecosystem they survived in, the prey base they survived in is gone. So this is just really ridiculous talk about bringing these animals and releasing them into the wild. There's no place for them anymore.
So, what does happen if they introduce the dire wolf?
I'm very involved in Mexican wolf recovery and how difficult that is just to bring a native southwestern wolf subspecies back to the habitat. I just can't imagine it would be possible at all to take some crazy idea to take some Pleistocene predator and throw it out there in an intact ecosystem that's very different from the ecosystem that came from it. It all just seems like such silly, crazy talk to bring these out in the wild. But we were talking before about, well, what value is this? Having these big splashes, like we're working on dire wolves, we're working on mammoths, brings donations in, brings funding in by the millions. And with that millions of dollars coming in, they can use that money to develop some amazing genetic techniques and advances in genetic management and genetic engineering. So in that sense, using the mammoth and the dire wolf as a fundraiser allows all these funds to come in and allows companies like this to develop things that people in academia aren't, because they don't have the funding.
Right.
So they're doing some really, really cutting edge, amazing things. And some of these advancements and things they learn in genetic analysis is going to be super important and super valuable for other things. But you just have to get past this idea about the woolly mammoth and the dire wolf.
So they honestly chose really wisely with the dire wolf, because it generated a lot of talk, a lot of interest, a lot of funds generated.
And the Game of Thrones connection was a big help. And we know so much about dog genetics just from having captive dogs, domestic dogs. We've done a lot of domestic dog genetics, and we've done a whole bunch of wolf genetics, a lot of wolf genetics. So they had a platform to start from that all they needed to do was make the fur white and then make it a little bit bigger. And one thing we didn't talk about is what was a dire wolf? The dire wolf wasn't much bigger than a normal Canadian wolf.
Why do they make it look like it's just like 3 times the size?
That's just pop culture. That's just Game of Thrones stuff. And people talk about this dire wolf. In fact, the scientific name for dire wolf literally means like terrible or horrible wolf. But if you look at the fossils, there's over 4,000 fossils in the La Brea tar pits in Los Angeles. They have a whole bunch of Ice Age fossils in there, and they have over 4,000 dire wolf fossils from there.
Wow.
And so they have a whole bunch of things you can analyze. And when they look at size differences of all the dire wolf specimens in the United States that are in museums, they find that on the average, they average just a little bit bigger than a Canadian wolf. And in fact, many of them in the La Brea tar pits are smaller than an average Canadian wolf, and some are bigger. And when you average them, the average is a little bit bigger than a Canadian wolf, but not by much.
Yeah.
So we're not talking about dire wolves being these gigantic white things. They weren't.
Right.
They're just a little bit bigger.
And that question was actually raised in my mind just a little bit ago when you talked about the skull size. And I'm like, wait, I thought they were massive.
Right. Right. No, and like in the La Brea tar pits, I think the dire wolves outnumbered. They have gray wolf skulls in the La Brea tar pits from the Pleistocene, because we had gray wolves in the Pleistocene, and the dire wolf skulls outnumber regular gray wolf skulls by a couple 100 to 1. There's a real imbalance of a lot of dire wolves in the tar pits and very few gray wolves. So
being introduced into the wild, wouldn't the genetics be even more through their breeding? Wouldn't they just become more dissolved? Does that make sense? I mean, because the dire wolves aren't going to in the wild only breed with the other quote unquote dire wolves that were introduced.
They probably would. The genetic study, of course, that's the same genetic study 5 years ago that I think has been superseded by some of this recent stuff with colossal. But that study actually said there's no evidence of interbreeding with gray wolves and dire wolves at that time. At the time they published that was just 4 years ago. And then now I think Colossal probably has better genetic information. But
what stopped them from breeding, though?
They were just different enough. They said the genetics was different enough that they couldn't interbreed. Now, if they really are 99.5%, maybe they could interbreed. But remember, humans and chimps are 89.8% the same. We can't interbreed. So, so there's no guarantee at 99.5 they could interbreed. Maybe they couldn't.
That's interesting to
Especially
me.
when you think about the dire wolf genes. There was 6 that they could not reproduce in these little white pups, whatever they are. There were 6 dire wolf genes they couldn't, because they caused the blindness and they caused that. And so interbreeding between dire wolves and gray wolves, if there's some of those genes that are not
get blind and deaf puppies,
you might that might be a reason supporting the idea that they couldn't interbreed, because there are these incompatibilities with some of the genes.
So to really simplify this, they have not created a dire wolf. Have they created?
They've created a gray wolf that has 14 dire wolf genes inserted into it.
And it's as simple as
and
that.
I shouldn't say inserted. I keep saying inserted, but what they do is they looked at that gene, those dire wolf genes, there's 14 of them, and they see what the sequence is, and then they just produce that sequence in a gray wolf, recreate it in a gray wolf genome, and then they take that, they can insert that in a genome, and they take that genome and they insert it into a nucleus of a cell that becomes the fetus. And then they implant it into a big dog, a domestic dog. So they use dogs as surrogate mothers for these not artificially inseminated, but artificially implanted into the uterus of these big dogs. And they use big dogs so they wouldn't have any problem carrying in case they were bigger.
In case they were
big dogs. And then they removed all 3 of these puppies from the dogs with cesarean section, took them out, and then raised them.
Wow. This is so
Yeah.
hard for such
Yeah.
a dumb little boy to wrap his mind around.
So they're building the DNA code, taking a gray wolf and then just replacing a few genes with the dire wolf version of that, and then implanting that in the dog until it grows a puppy, and then take the puppy out, and then they have this white thing that is growing faster. It looks like it's going to be bigger. But like I said, they weren't a whole lot bigger than Canadian wolves. So let's not get really excited about this giant wolf, because that's not really what dire wolves were. And if these wolves turn out to be 50% larger than gray wolves, well, they just engineered something that was never really on the planet.
Right. You made a mutant.
Because they weren't that big. Right.
Yeah.
There's a word called chimera, which is it's an animal that has DNA from like two different things. And that's exactly what these are. They're chimeras.
Now, I've always talked about this, going back to my conversation about having to ask Justin. I've always said this about wildlife conservation issues, like down in Oklahoma where they said we're going to pull deer out that were captive raised. And it's so hard to understand that. Like, it's so hard. If you read that, you're like, holy cow, they've really got something here.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, to the simple mind, it's like, man, they're talking big words.
So you're talking about some of the deer that have a genetic sequence that makes them, it doesn't make them CWD proof, but it makes them live longer once they get CWD, which isn't necessarily a good thing, because then they're going to
breed.
Well, they're not only going to, well, breeding's not the issue, but if the average length of time that a CWD positive deer lives is 2 years. If these deer with this genetic code live 4 years, it means they're shedding these infectious prions for 4 years instead of 2 years in the wild. So that's something nobody talks about.
So I got you.
So they're out. If they're out in the wild for 4 years, walking around shedding these prions into the soil.
Gotcha.
I'd rather have them die in 2 years.
They're giving it to other deer that are
they're
not.
spreading it for 4 years rather than spreading it for 2 years. So there's these other consequences that nobody talks about. The other thing is, if you're changing the genes of a genome, they're replacing individual genes. But if you've got a deer breeder pens and you're breeding deer that have this certain sequence that you think is better for a CWD kind of future, if you're breeding those deer, you're selecting for that gene, but genes are linked on the chromosomes. And if you breed for this CWD gene, you're going to breed also for some other genes that are linked on the DNA.
Interesting.
And so you might be breeding, if you concentrate on more and more of those deer that have that certain CWD resistant gene, it really makes them live longer. You could also be carrying something that makes them more susceptible to disease, or makes their milk production a lot lower, or makes smaller antlers. You could be carrying these other genes while you're selecting for this one.
Right.
Because when you start monkeying around with not just genetic engineering, but selection for one trait, you're also going to inadvertently be selecting for some other traits that you don't understand.
Right.
There's a lot of danger in all of this.
So the reason I asked that, the reason I tied that with this, how does somebody wade through all this crap? Like when they read something, and I have a very unique opportunity to call some incredible wildlife biologists and say, explain this to me.
And I do too. I have experts when it comes to disease.
So how do they wade through all this crap if they read something?
Yeah, I think the only thing you can do is the old adage, consider the source. And if it's coming from this company that's a $10 billion company, and they say we have a dire wolf, okay, well that's one source. And then I saw and was happy to see a lot of articles after the initial push on this dire wolves, a lot of articles coming out saying, well, wait a minute. A minute. And then I even saw some headlines that I think that the editors went back and changed, that instead of saying scientists produce dire wolves, I think they changed some of the headlines later that said scientists produce these animals they say are dire wolves, or something, a very subtle switch where they weren't so emphatically positive that these were dire wolves. And so you've got to look at the source. Is the source coming from a scientific source that has no dog in the fight, no pun intended, has no connection, no money connection? Or is it coming from an actor or someone who's contributing to the program? Or is it coming in where most of it comes from is naive reporters that just pick up on, they say it's a dire wolf, so this is the coolest story, of the year. They've de-extincted dire wolves, and so they write this story. They just fall for it. The young naive reporters, and they just fall for it, and they just repeat all of the talking points. And
so what do you think will come of this? I mean, do you think that they will ever come out and say, okay, we didn't create the dire wolf?
No. No, because
what's the end solution here?
Yeah, they've justified it by saying we're using this morphological species concept. And so that's saying if we produce something that looks like a dire wolf, then therefore it is. So they're just going to dig their heels in, and they're just.
So we're going to always have a world where some people believe they've created the dire wolf, and some people are smart enough to realize no, they haven't.
Yep, for sure. But I think this big rush of excitement will die down, and there'll be enough people writing about. Now, wait a minute, things we're talking about on the podcast. And I think more and more people understand, okay, I was kind of duped with that first rush. I was kind of duped, but it's more complicated than that. They're not really dire wolves and that sort of thing.
Now, I asked you a really stupid question last night. But again, I wish more people would be okay with asking stupid questions. Nobody wants to look dumb. I am okay with looking dumb. As people read this, even if they say, well, they haven't created a dire wolf, but it gives me hope for bringing back animals from extinction.
Yeah, and that's the problem. The problem is people starting to say, oh, well, we don't need to worry so much about endangered species. We can just bring them back.
Right.
So there's a real danger in the general public and a lot of people and even politicians starting to think, oh, well, extinction's really not forever. I guess we don't need to worry so much about all the impacts endangered species have on landowners and businesses and things, because it's not a big deal. We can just engineer it. And, that's absolutely not true. It's not even true in the case of dire wolves that they're talking about de-extincting. And that's just it's a terrible narrative to have, that we can just bring animals back from extinction, because we can't.
Right.
We can't at all.
So they really have. Again, we are not here to take away from what they did.
Right.
We're here to share truth. We're here to share information. But what they have done is introduced a dangerous thought process.
Right. I agree. And you're right. There will be things that we don't even know now and may not even know when they come to fruition, but there's a ton of things that they're learning in a genetics lab about genetics that is going to help a lot of things in the future. A lot of things. It's just my problem is just these aren't dire wolves. Stop saying they're dire wolves.
Right.
And the second part of it that really bothers me is any talk about releasing some of these genetically engineered animals that may look like something else into any kind of a natural environment. We can't be doing that.
Right. Is there any dangers to? Obviously, there's dangers to existing species. What are the dangers to the habitat when that's introduced?
Well, I think in the case of the Arctic habitat, releasing an Indian elephant with fur in the Arctic habitat, I can't even imagine what would happen, but I know nothing good would happen.
Right.
I mean, you've got this animal that doesn't belong in this current ecosystem, and you're unleashing it on that assemblage of plants and animals that are now working in harmony and in a community level, and you throw a big elephant in there. That makes absolutely no sense. When it comes to like dire wolves, I can't imagine having something that's a little bit bigger than a Canadian wolf and releasing it on some reservation lands in North Dakota. It makes no sense. It makes no sense. It'll never happen.
I can't wrap my head around what they think the benefit of doing that is.
Right.
Just the feel good of we brought an animal back from extinction.
I think the feel good of the millions of dollars that are flowing right now into Colossal. I think
that would feel pretty good.
That feels pretty good.
Yeah, I'm sure it does.
Yeah.
Speaking of, and before I move on, is there anything about the dire wolf, about this project, that you really want to inform people about before I take a turn?
I would just say that if they had come out and said, look, we found 14 dire wolf genes that are compatible in gray wolf, and we just to see if we could, we inserted 14 dire wolf genes, and these gray wolves running around have 14 dire wolf genes in them. That was really cool. I would love.
But nobody else cares.
I'd be excited. Nobody else. That the money would not flow.
Only the redneck nerds care about that.
That's true. That's true.
Only the redneck nerds.
Yeah, I'd be really excited about that. But we got to be honest about what's going on, and like I say, no doubt they're doing great stuff with really smart people doing 100%. Amazing things.
And again, I can't reiterate that enough. The purpose of this was not to take away from anything they've done, but just to shed some light.
They don't really care anyway.
Right. Well, I'm a kind person though. Just to shed some light so people know the truth. That is the point of this.
Yeah.
Because I want to. I want to inform people, much like my goofy wife who texts me and says, "There's a new wolf. It's going to kill everything because it's 95% bigger and it's as big as my car." Anyways, I just want to inform people on the truth of what has really happened,
right.
which is impressive.
Everybody saw the headlines, and they're like, I think most people thought, I know that's not true, but I don't. That's all.
I would go to the extent to most people. I've never seen Game of Thrones. I'm going to go ahead and say that. Never seen Game
I
of
haven't
Thrones.
either, actually.
I think people who have never seen Game of Thrones would have never even knew there was a thing called a dire wolf.
Yeah, that's
and
true.
So all they know is that these people are saying there's a new giant wolf so either you've watched Game of Thrones and you're like, holy crap, they've created the dire wolf.
Yeah.
Or you've never seen Game of Thrones and you're like, holy crap, they've created a giant mega white wolf that's going to kill everything in America.
That's right.
And so either way, it's just I wanted to shed some light on what's really happened. And so luckily I knew a source to go to. Well,
it was good timing.
I knew the guy who could point me in the right direction. And so I really appreciate you shedding some light on that. Now, what's really exciting, let's get into the meat of why we're here, not here on the podcast, here for the week. And that's big game wildlife management, big game conservation. Boone and Crockett has recently introduced the Javelina. Pope and Young is in the process of introducing the Javelina to the record books.
It's a new record book category.
Two questions. Why did it take so long and why are we doing it? Guys, I am all about prioritizing your feet. If you take care of your feet on the mountains or in the tree stand, you will just undoubtedly last longer. I remember the first time I ever went out west wearing a cheap pair of boots and cotton socks. Hot spots and blisters absolutely just took over that hunt. And here's what I learned. The more comfortable your feet are, the further you'll go, the faster you'll get there, the longer you'll stay on the mountain, and you'll just hunt better because your mind is on the hunt, not on your feet. That's when I come upon Schnee's. Schnee's makes the best mountain boots, in my opinion. I'm going to go ahead and tell you my favorite pair. My favorite pair is the Timberlines. I have ran the mountain in those on several different occasions, several different climates, several different terrain types, and those boots just seem to always perform. They're light, they're fast, they're comfortable. There's no break in. They're Italian made. They're high quality, phenomenal boots. However, I'm also here in the Midwest. Do a lot of Midwest hunting, a lot of tree stand hunting, and I'm a big fan of rubber boots for that. Here's why: leather holds scent. So I'm a big fan that I don't want any leather on my feet when I'm whitetail hunting, walking in and out of my tree stands. So I've always been a leather boot guy. A couple years ago, Schnee's introduced the Highwoods. They now have it in a 0-gram insulation and a 400-gram insulation. It's a phenomenal rubber boot. Again, I have pushed those boots really hard. I've actually used them on quite a few snowy pheasant hunts, walked a lot of miles in them. They're super, super comfortable, super warm, super tough. Guys, prioritize your feet. Take care of your feet. If you're sitting in a tree stand, make sure your feet are going to be warm. If you're on the mountain, make sure you've got a good pair of merino socks and a good pair of boots so you can stay on the mountain longer, hunt harder, be more successful. Guys, go to schnees.com. That's SCHNEES.com for the best boots money can buy.
Why did it take so long is a question I can't answer, because I have an old manila file folder from about 20 years ago that says Javelina, B&C category Javelina. And I back then was talking to people like Buck Buckner at Boone and Crockett. And I've been a professional member of Boone and Crockett for 15, 20 years probably. I'm on the records committee of Boone and Crockett. And I'd be at Boone and Crockett meetings and I started asking people, why are Javelina not on the Boone and Crockett?
Now, 20 years ago,
category?
were they just to let's cover this real quick. Javelina are managed in 4 states. Is that right?
3 states plus
3
Mexico.
states.
Well, and Mexico doesn't have really structured management, but Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas are the 3 states in the U.S. where Javelina occur. And Arizona has managed it as a game animal since 1929.
Okay.
And Texas and New Mexico have managed them from game animals since the 1930s.
That's why I was asking.
These have always been game animals for us. Arizona is a lottery-style draw where you have to apply and just like a deer tag and hope you get drawn, and the odds are pretty good.
We just auctioned off a commissioner's tag for Javelina.
That's right. That's right.
But
and so they're valuable animals. We've got like 58,000 people hunting javelina in those three
they're
states.
not only valuable, it's one of the funnest animals in America to hunt.
They are super.
And for those of you
fun.
that say they don't taste good, you don't know how to cook, because they are good table fare.
You've got to you've got to cook them a certain way. You can't slice it and put it on a Weber grill over a Duraflame log and like cook a steak that way. But if you pressure cook them or you slow cook them, add green chilies, put them in a tortilla with shredded meat, green chilies. I throw some pinto beans in there too.
Guys, I want you to
barbecue.
consider where he said those animals are: New Mexico, Arizona, Texas. You look at that and you say, man, why are they managing that area? I bet they need green chilies in them when I cook them.
That's probably why.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And they, what's interesting is they're relatively newer invaders into North America.
In the grand scheme of wildlife, they are.
We had in placing, we had peccaries, big peccaries running all over with all the other dire wolves and all the other big Pleistocene animals. They died out in North America. And they were also in South America. And then the collared peccary, what we call the javelina, reinvaded North America up through Mexico and just reached Texas and New Mexico and Arizona. In the last couple hundred years, really, because if you look at Native American trash pits, like bones of what they were eating after they ate their trash pits, you look in those bone fragments and there's no javelina in bone fragments, really
just
at
so
all.
You said collared peccary. I do want to make sure, because I got some basic rednecks that listen to this. I do want you to understand it's not a pig.
That's right. That's right. The javelina or collared peccary, there's three types of peccary in North and South America. And the peccary family is a New World family. It's North and South America it evolved in, like I said, in the Pleistocene. The pig family is an Old World. I mean, that's Europe and Asia. And so we brought feral hogs over. This Spanish brought feral hogs over in like the 1500s. And that's the wild hogs that we have. And so we've got pigs and we've got javelina, and they're different families.
Yeah,
the javelina are not even in and there's a whole bunch of different characteristics. Like the javelina have this big gland, big scent gland right above the tail, like a big.
And that's why everyone thinks they taste bad. Right there.
Right. The smell. They don't smell good.
You got to handle that well.
Yeah. And the gland is in the skin. So if you hang the javelina up and you start skinning it, you can skin the whole javelina and forget, I forgot about the gland. And you don't need to worry about it because it comes right off with the skin. Yep. And if you look at the underneath side of the skin, you can see like a white football shaped like spot. That's the underside of the gland, but it comes right off with the skin without you even noticing it. And the carcass itself is just meat.
Yeah. Okay. So I just wanted to tie that all together. But what? So like you said, and that's why I wanted to ask where they all were, how long they've been here. Because 20 years ago, they were game managed animals.
In 1929, they were managed.
Yeah. So 20 years ago, when you brought this up, they were managed.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So,
and
what
popular
took so
game
long?
animals. At the time, I started asking around Boone and Crockett, and everybody just kind of shrugged their shoulder and said, "I don't know." And I couldn't get any traction. And I kind of, after a while, I dropped it. I didn't push it aggressively. I had 4 boys and a busy job and other things to do, so I forgot about it. And then it wasn't until about a year ago, Nicole Tapman from New Mexico Game and Fish called me up and she said, "Would you write a letter from Arizona Game and Fish supporting a Boone and Crockett category for javelina?" And I thought, holy cow, I've been wanting this for my whole entire career. I will not just write a letter. I'm clearing my calendar. Let's get down and let's put a proposal together, and we'll engage people in Texas, some people in Mexico, and we got this team together with Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas, and Mexico and Old Mexico, and we wrote this proposal justifying the fact that they were managed sustainably as a game animal. They were very popular with hunters. They were a native North American species. And we put all of this stuff together as a justification, took it to the records committee of Boone and Crockett. It was very well received. Someone on the records committee said that was the best proposal they've ever seen in their long history with their records committee.
And you said, it is.
Of course it is. Yeah. And so it was really exciting to all of a sudden get all this traction. And there were some people saying, I don't know, are they really even big game animals and things like that? But we talked with them and we got people on board. So
can I ask you a question? Mm-hmm. What qualifies a big game animal?
You're asking the wrong person, because I think antelope jackrabbits are like the smallest big game animal we have in Arizona that I consider.
Oh yeah, I was told you would get fired up about that.
Yeah, but they're hooved. I mean, they're an ungulate. They're hooved animals. They dress out at about 33 pounds, about 50 pounds live weight.
Because the javelina is only, 50, 70 pounds, somewhere in there.
About 50 pounds, probably live weight be average, because a long-term average is about 33 pounds dressed out. So I don't know. I've just always considered them game animals, and I'm shocked when people say that they're surprised they're a game animal. I don't know. It seems obvious to me. You've got these cool desert native pigs out there.
Yeah.
And so there's excitement about it. We put this proposal in December. Boone and Crockett agreed to add it as a category. They're right now talking about what the minimum score might be for entry, and getting the score sheet and implementing and doing all that.
So to catch you up, now Pope and Young is following suit. We had a board vote on that. Now it goes to our membership vote,
Right.
and you're here to inform people.
Yep. So I gave a talk this morning, and now we're talking.
Quite literally why you're here, to inform people as to why this is an important vote, why it should be voted.
Yep.
The scientific data that supports it.
And I heard good things about Pope and Young just used our proposal, of course, from Boone and Crockett to consider that, and it had all the information in there. And so I guess the records committee recommended it, the board approved it, and now just regular and
what kind of information is provided in something like that?
And there's like Boone and Crockett has a couple things that have to be satisfied to propose something for a category. And one is that they're sustainably managed by agencies, and they are. And
which they are in 3 states.
Yep, they absolutely are. And then one is another, and I think there's 3 of them. And another one of the criteria is that those agencies that manage them have to be supportive of them being a category.
I actually almost got in trouble down in Texas. First time I ever saw one of these little critters, and I thought, well, look at these goofy looking pigs.
That's different.
Well, when I grew up, you see pigs, you kill them.
Yeah, right.
And so I didn't know you could only kill 2 javelina.
Yeah, one in Arizona.
And so I almost got in trouble. Good thing I had a buddy, or I'd have been in trouble.
Yeah, they only have, javelina only have 2 young a year.
Really?
And
so
feral hogs will have 10, and then 6 months later they'll have 10 more.
10 more.
So that's a big difference in the reproductive rate, and why they have to be managed more carefully than, and why they're not invasive like feral hogs.
Right.
Whole different reproductive output.
Side note, javelina are, I have always said, one of the best animals to introduce a new hunter to.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what's really fun about them, and for archery, and for muzzleloader, and for pistols.
I've always said,
if
you've never bow hunted before, you're a rifle hunter, and you say, I really want to try bow hunting, javelina.
Yeah, absolutely.
The first hunt I wanted to go from a compound to a recurve. I thought, I'm going to hunt javelina because they're easy to hunt.
Yep.
There really is an abundance,
but they're not too easy. They're hard to find.
Yeah,
yes. Once you find them,
there's a group of 40 of them, 30 of them, and you can stalk right in. And
usually about 10 herds of 10.
Really?
Yeah, herds of 30 are just exaggerations. They don't get that big.
I've got to show you pictures.
I don't believe you.
I'm going to show you pictures when I get down there. But they really are. I mean, they truly are pretty perfect. Easy to hunt. If you're
I have
in
4
an area
boys, and we hunted javelina all the time growing up. My dad just killed a javelina at 89 years old.
I'm gonna start looking through pictures while you talk.
Killed a mule deer the next year at 90 years old. But they are the perfect animal for that. And what I like to do is try to shoot javelina with different weapons all the time, with 44 Magnum pistol, with a 1911 45 and
blow
little
AR
you gotta try pistol brace. A blowgun. We did have someone petition us to allow atlatls, the old primitive spear throwing device.
That would be epic. Now this might not even be a question for you. Might be just a totally. You might have no information to give here. But when they did decide to introduce these, I kind of thought, man, all javelina are about the same size.
Oh, right.
There's no giant. You don't ever see a javelina. I mean, you have a group of 10 come in, you might say that's the biggest, but it's not like, oh my gosh, that's
certainly harder to judge. Probably not a whole lot different than bears. Bears may show different size variation, but as far as the size of the skull, it's not that easy.
I counted. It's exactly
there's 10.
Oh, crap.
We had a wildlife manager when I first started, and he said back in his day, the herds were like 30 javelina. It was the average herd size was 30. And I went back and looked at his survey data in the late 1970s, and it was 10.
It's exactly 10.
Yep.
Man.
Yep.
Crap. Dang it. I've only been wrong twice in my life.
And
this makes
once.
third. My Lord. But I asked that.
Looking for a trophy, though, I mean, you can look at a big one. You can, if you get a side shot, you can't tell males and females unless you get like a side view and you see the penis sheath. It's kind of like a black bear. Sometimes you can see a penis sheath if you get the right angle. So you might see that. You might just see, I mean, the older animals will get just kind of a fatter head. You might see like worn elbows on an older animal. There's
cut up.
If you look at a whole group of Javelina and you can compare them, you can pick out a big one.
But the reason I asked that is with them being so close in size, how do we come up with minimums for that? I mean, it seems like they're all either going to make it or they're all either going to not. You know what I mean?
The awesome thing about this case in Javelina is Arizona has kept an Arizona record book for all weapon types since 1970.
Really?
So we have we have books published with a huge database of all these skull measurements, length and width. New Mexico uses SCI records, so we have those SCI records, and this is all in our proposal. Texas, since 1910, Texas has kept records in Texas, and that's length and width. The only little quirk was that Arizona, since 1970, has kept track of the length of the skull, not including the incisors. For some strange reason, they've always done that. In all the other states, and Boone and Crockett with bears and lions and Pope and Young, it's always length and width, including the teeth. Well, we looked at a bunch of Javelina skulls, and we saw that the teeth add about 2/16, about an eighth of an inch, pretty consistently, actually, about an eighth of an inch. So when Boone and Crockett and Pope and Young are looking at what a minimum entry score looks like, they've got records dating back to 1970 in Arizona, and all you need to do is add 1/8. To all of those, and it would be consistent with what the Boone Crockett and Pope and Young measurement would be. So we got all kinds of data to inform what's a reasonable minimum score. And if you look at all of them that have ever been measured in all three states, there's only been 21 skulls that have gone over 15 inches length. And
this might be
only 21.
This might be the closest animal ever as far as minimums go for Pope and Young and Boone and Crockett, because there can't be a massive difference.
Right. Unless, you're right. You're right. That's a good observation that Pope and Young and Boone and Crockett scores might be similar because they're so fun. And so I don't like to say they're overly easy to hunt, but a lot of probably more Javelina are hunted with a bow.
Javelina are built for bow hunting.
Yeah.
They really are.
So they're probably, so I could see, I mean, I'm certainly not speaking for either club, but I could see that maybe there won't be as much difference as you might for mule deer or something.
Yeah. Interesting. That's very, very,
that's
very
all
cool.
Other people making those decisions, and they're talking about them now.
So were there any very interesting questions that came from this weekend from people that listened to the seminar? Any really interesting questions that came or were raised?
Nothing really noteworthy. I had a good conversation with someone about saying when you choose the minimum score, it would be good to pay attention to, okay, if you look at bears, that kind of minimum score, there would be like 20% of those bears would be above that minimum score in this database. And then you look at Javelina and say, if you pick this score or that score, what percent of the scores would be above that? So there's different ways to look at that to try to kind of make it consistent with the other species too.
Right. Yeah, that is I really wish I would have had time to come to your seminar, because I really wanted to hear it, but we were preparing for the auction.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, when I heard about the introduction of Javelina, I got really excited. Because that might be the only time I ever get in Pope and Young. Because they're
I don't know it, but I think I have 3 skulls at home, a couple more in the freezer. My dad has 3 skulls, and we just rough measured them just with a tape measure to see if we were even close, and we're not even close on any of those 6 skulls. Yeah, so it's not like it's going to be an easy thing to make the book.
Yeah, you still you still have to kill a tank. You still have to kill a big
and a big one. Yeah, and I'm sure that the minimums are going to be set so that, I mean, it's not a slam dunk.
Right. Now this might open up a can of worms, and if it does, so be it. But whenever I have a gentleman like yourself, whenever I have somebody who's just really, really intelligent, I want to be informed. I want to learn. I want to grow as a sportsman. I want to figure out what can I do to help preserve, promote, and protect the sport I love. And I take that back, because after my conversation with Chris, we shouldn't call it a sport. Anyways, what do you think the biggest issue on wildlife conservation is right now? What do you think the biggest attack on wildlife conservation is right now that we as hunters and sportsmen and outdoorsmen can help make a difference in?
Yeah, I think it's probably, my answer would be no surprise. It's the large predators. They're just such an attack, state after state, in a lot of different ways of people just not liking, some people, a minority of people, not liking the idea of people shooting bears and mountain lions. And it's completely sustainable. We've got all kinds of data, the way we're managing them, and it's a completely sustainable harvest, but it's not about science to them. It's about just
Feelings,
not
emotions.
liking that. Yeah. They, I gave a presentation at our commission meeting on Friday because someone had petitioned our department to ban the use of dogs when hunting all mammals in Arizona. And so I gave a presentation showing the flaws in the petition and why we wouldn't want to do that, and why that might actually be damaging to at least lion and bear management to not have that tool. Because when you're using dogs, you have you have the ability to be selective in maybe walking away from a female mountain lion in a tree. Yeah. And you don't have that if you don't have dogs. The data is very clear then that you kill a higher proportion of females, which is the opposite of what you want to do if you want to be conservative and don't want to affect the population, but still want to allow harvest.
Now, before I ask you what we as sportsmen can do, the same way that you blame Game of Thrones for the dire wolf, I blame Disney because we have fantasized the bear, we have fantasized the lion, we have a whole freaking series called Lion King. Right. And now everyone thinks like, oh, they're so cute and sweet, like we can't kill them.
And they talk to their friends.
Yeah, and they talk to their friends, and they're
my
frolicking
4 boys
in the grass.
weren't allowed to see Bambi.
Really?
I think my son that's a wildlife professor now at Texas A&M, I don't think he's ever seen Bambi.
I don't think I've ever seen it either.
Yeah, they weren't allowed.
Not that my parents banned it. I just don't.
But Bambi it was released in 1942, so maybe you missed it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It wasn't really that popular, but Bambi is what people talk about. But yeah, Disney has been a long string of, and then the bad guy in there is usually the hunter. Yeah. And they don't differentiate between someone who's a poacher and a hunter. I thought it was interesting. There was a Disney movie about, I forgot what it was called.
I've got 3 kids. I've probably seen it if it's
a Disney movie. New. It was in the 1950s though, and it was about the dogs and cats, and they ran away, and they spent the whole movie trying to get back home.
Oh yeah.
Well, something home. Homeward Bound.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So there was a 1950s version, which you may not have seen. And this hunter's out duck hunting next to this marsh, and he sees this cat that's all wet. And it's muddy.
Yeah.
And he brings the cat in, and he nurses it, and he takes it back to the fireplace, and he's sitting in his hunting clothes by the fireplace, and he nurses his cat back to health. He's a good guy. And then the remake in about the 1990s, there's no, I forgot how the cat gets found, but it's sure not from a nasty old hunter. They had to sanitize that out of there. And I thought, I wish we could get back to the day in the 1950s where it was okay for things like Disney to portray hunters as the good guy who's out there. And
I think, and before I ask you what I think that, we as sportsmen can do to really help turn that tide, I'll tell you what I think we can do. And that is showing people that we're more than just bloodthirsty killers.
Yeah.
What I mean by that is I got a comment one time. This woman says, I wish the bear would have turned around and eat you. Like, why don't you do it without a bow, you idiot? Whatever. Just nasty comments. I didn't comment back publicly. I messaged her. I sent her a message. I said, I would love to have a conversation with you about the importance of hunting bears.
Yeah.
I said, but before I do, I would like to tell you about me. I'm a husband. My wife is an elementary school teacher. I have 3 children. I'm on staff at my church. I work in the hunting and outdoor conservation community. I just told her, like, I made myself a human to her. And I informed her, hey, all of the protein that was harvested from this bear is feeding my wife, my really 3 children, myself. Now, what kind of questions do you have about bear hunting? And she immediately changes her tone. She immediately flips it because it's no longer a grip and grin of a dead bear. It's no longer me sitting behind a bear smiling, a dead bear smiling with a weapon. This is a person. He's got a family. He's got kids. They're utilizing the meat. I think one of the biggest things we can do as hunters is work to paint the full picture.
Is lead with that. Lead with that in your social media posts and stuff.
100%.
Talk about the food. Talk about the enjoyment. And I've done social media posts about a hunt, and there's no animals in it. I mean, it's me and my dad, and it's me and my kids, and it's sunset, and it's all these cool things, these cool other animals that we saw. And look what a great hunt we had. And I will lead by saying another successful hunt for the Heffelfinger family. And there's no animals and no dead animals in there. And so you're right. We used to come back from a hunt with 4x6 prints And then around the water cooler at work, we would show just the people we knew who liked hunting. We'd show them these prints. Now we get a picture, we put it out on the World Wide Web for billions of people to look at, and they do. And it's really problematic if we've got tongues hanging out, we've got a lot of blood in the picture, we're sitting on the animal, someone's got a beer can in the picture. That's really bad news. And in that respect, social media is going to be the end of our hunting.
Yeah.
If we're not careful.
Absolutely.
We're not careful.
So,
and we need to emphasize the food aspect. I can't tell you how important it is for acceptance of people who know nothing about hunting, is when they see your meal included in your hunt. They see that you prepared that. That does wonders for.
Which is exactly why Pope and Young introduced at this convention for the very first time the first annual Wild Game Showdown. Because Pope and Young, Boone and Crockett, we're all trophy hunters. That's all we care about.
Right. That's what people.
We don't care about anything else other than the size of the antlers.
Yeah.
You are so far from the truth. Because if I kill a bigger deer, it means it's got more meat on it too.
That's right. 4x4s eat good too.
Very few times do you look and say, man, that deer has bigger antlers, but he's a lot smaller. Usually they have more meat.
Yep.
And we utilize that meat. We are just because we kill a bigger animal doesn't mean we're only after the antlers. No. So what do you think we as hunters can do to really help wildlife conservation, to protect the way of life that we adore so much? Because I want my kids, I want my grandkids, my great grandkids, I want them to be able to enjoy their hunting heritage just like I have.
Yep.
What can we do to protect that?
Absolutely. And stay off. I mean, if you're on social media and someone posts something about wolves, what I see all the time is the shoot, shovel, shut up people come. All of these people just flood it. The only good wolf is a dead wolf, and all this anti-wolf stuff. And you got to understand, the vast majority of the public thinks it's pretty cool to bring wolves back, and hunters have brought back all of these other native wildlife species, and why they wouldn't take the next step to bring back the rest of the native wildlife species that the rest of the public enjoys. And so some people are worried about wolf recovery reducing tags in some areas, and it's going to. But if you're going to come out on the opposite side of the table from most of the general public, that's what's going to spell the end to hunting. So we have 5% of the public hunts, and that 5% of U.S. People hunt. And we do that because the other 95%, not 95%, but about 75% sees hunting as a positive force for conservation, something good. And the minute they see people posting, shoot, shovel, shut up, these wolves are bad, we don't want any wolves, the minute they start seeing that, they're going to start questioning, are these guys really are these really a positive thing for conservation? Or are they kind of standing in the way of conservation of some of our predators? So we need to be very, very careful about how we position ourselves.
Have you ever read Peter Churchborn's How to Talk About Hunting?
I was with Peter Churchborn just a couple months ago at the North American, but I'm not sure what you're talking about specifically.
He produced a book called How to Talk About Hunting.
Oh, that one, right. That was NRA sponsored.
And I will say this, very boring. Like, I'm not telling you like this. It really is a lot of analytical data, a lot of like just, you've got to be a redneck nerd if you want to enjoy this book. However, I do think that educating ourselves on how to communicate the importance of wildlife conservation, the importance that we as hunters play in wildlife conservation, being able to portray that to somebody who doesn't understand our way of life is very important.
Yeah, you might really want to defend something and not really have the ammunition to do it. And that's a lot of what I do, a lot of things that I write about conservation and in support of hunting. I wrote a whole chapter that was titled Hunting as a Vested Interest in Wildlife Conservation, meaning people have a vested interest in wildlife, like wanting good, healthy elk populations. That vested interest is what drives conservation. People sitting at home watching TV that have no vested interest in some of these species aren't going to be down at the state capitol campaigning for good conservation. Right. So definitely educate yourself and watch your social media presence and watch what you're portraying.
So to kind of further this question, what can we as hunters do? What should we inform ourselves about? What issues should we inform ourselves about? I would highly say the lead issue is one for me. Because, again, I've not done anything illegal. I've not done anything immoral. I've not done anything unethical. I was just uninformed. So what kind of issues and topics outside of just obeying the laws that are put in place, what kind of topics should we really inform ourselves on to help wildlife conservation and management?
Yeah, I think, like I mentioned, I think the large carnivores and the attack on those is going to be a big one for hunters to stay engaged with.
And I promise you, saying, well, the wolves are killing the cow elk.
Yeah.
They don't, because then the non-hunters are going to say, well, so you only care about cow elk.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I mean, we care about all wildlife, and it had better be the message that the 95% that don't hunt get. The message that they get better be, we're all about conservation. We're about all species, and we're about managing all animals for all people.
Obviously, it would be a whole another podcast episode to talk about those issues. But can you point people in a direction to find good information on how to inform themselves on how to talk about those issues?
Yeah. The howl.org is doing a really good job of
those guys are incredible.
Of educating, but really being able to pull people together and mobilize them and stuff. So I would definitely be plugged into howl.org.
I love the work Charles is doing.
Yep.
We auctioned off a hunt to support him. I would encourage everybody to go and just dive into the information. He's and what I like about Charles is that you can call him and talk to him. I mean, just call up Hal and ask them. If you don't understand the article, call and ask them. If you don't understand what's being put out or why, call and ask them.
And your state wildlife agency probably has good information on their website. Most of them do. Like most of them will have a page on mountain lions and black bears and to learn more about how they're managed in your state. And then stay involved. I mean, show up at meetings like that commission meeting on Friday. We had a room full of a couple hundred people, and it was mostly hunters that showed up to show support,
which is encouraging,
or opposition to banning the use of dogs. And it's really important, because if the commission has only lion advocates show up and speak all day about how you need to ban this, and then they make a decision in the opposite on the opposite side of what those people wanted, it makes it seem like they're going against what the public wanted, but it's really not. This was just a highly mobilized group of anti-hunters. We need to make sure we have a good balance in the room so the commission hears both sides.
Why do what's the importance of states trying to cover up the presence of mountain lions? Because I live in Kansas, and if you ask them, there's no mountain lions.
I can't answer that. We got mountain lions all over, but I think
do you know what I mean though? There's states we don't have.
I don't think a state agency biologist is ever going to hide the fact. Okay. I don't believe that. I think
people just don't want to believe it.
I spent like 23 years as a regional biologist, and people sending me house cat photos and bobcat photos all the time saying, look, I got a mountain lion in my backyard. And they're not mountain lions. Right. So some of it's that, some of it's like, they get bombarded with sightings of mountain lions, and most of them aren't. So it gets them a little jaded about the next mountain lion sighting. Okay. I don't think any state biologist would know of a mountain lion and then, want to hide the fact.
Okay. That does make sense to me. I can understand that. I mean, we've cried wolf. We've cried lion.
Yeah. We got black panther sightings all the time. Like in Southern Arizona, we get black.
Are you a friend of Clay Newcomb?
Yeah, I am.
He's a believer.
That's right. The Panther. That's right. Yeah.
Justin told me I'm a fangirl of Clay Newcomb. Just so you know, my daughter's 13, and I act around Clay Newcomb about the same way she acts at a Taylor Swift concert.
He starts screaming, and
I'll tell you the reason why. I grew up as a little dumb redneck in the hills of Arkansas, and as I grew up, and I thought, I really want to make it in the outdoor industry. I really want to make something of this. I realized Clay Newcomb lives 10 miles from me, 5 miles from me.
That close. Wow.
And so to me, it was like, okay, well, if he can do it, I can do it. And so I really just loved watching him. And then you get to meet him, and he's one of the nicest dudes on planet Earth. And we're still trying to work on a, maybe I shouldn't say what we're trying to work on. Anyways, Jim, man, I can't thank you enough. I was really excited to sit down and talk these issues, because again, I'm what I call a curious mind. I don't have the answers to these things, but I really want to talk to people who do have the answers. And so I appreciate you shedding some light.
Important. There's an old saying that trust people who are always seeking knowledge. Don't trust people who claim to have found
it all. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And I don't think I know it all. I will admittedly say there are times where I just don't know. And if somebody asks me something, I will say that too. Don't be afraid to say, I don't know. I mean, if somebody raises a question,
really important. Yeah.
If a non-hunter raises a question to you, don't try to feed them some
because
some
they know
crap.
that.
Just say,
They
hey,
know that.
I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
I know there are resources who do know the answer to that. And I'll look into that and I'll share that with you. And
yeah, that's really that. I actually teach that to wildlife students at the university. My office is at the University of Arizona, and I'm always talking. In fact, I have a talk that's it's called Career Hacks, and it's just tips for being a professional. And I hound on that a lot. That you should be confident enough in yourself to not feel like you need to BS and start talking about things you don't know. Just say, I don't know. Let's Google it together. Let's find out
let's
together.
look it up.
Right? You should be, and the people I see that will go beyond that and start making stuff up. I feel like they're people that are not secure with themselves, and they can't stand saying that they don't know because they feel like they're bad, and so they've got to try to compensate for it. And you can't do that. You got to be comfortable enough to say, I don't know. Let's figure it out.
I've been guilty of saying that Google has ruined every good debate in history because before, if you debate who was taller, Michael Jordan or Kobe, and you're sitting there arguing, and now let's just figure this out now.
Yeah.
However, when it comes to issues like this, I think when we argue and when we debate and when we get, I don't want to say hostile, but when we get in that environment, it does more harm than good.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think you're absolutely right. Hey, why don't we just dive into this together? We'll look at different sources for both sides and
talk about
and talk about it. So there are very few things that I have with me every time I'm in the outdoors. Whether I am upland hunting, deer hunting, elk hunting, just out shooting my bow, out checking trail cameras, very few things that are always with me. One thing that I always have with me is my binocular harness. And I searched the world for what I felt to be the best binocular harness. In my opinion, there's a fine line in binocular harnesses. Either you get a lot of space for everything you need, but they're big, bulky, and heavy, or they're super streamlined and I just don't have space for everything that I want to have on my chest. Alaska Guide Creations makes phenomenal harnesses. Guys, I wear them all the time. I wear my harness probably every day at some point in my day. And so comfortability is important to me. The way that it stays put where I want it is important to me, but also having enough compartments and being able to move things around modularly to fit it where I want it is also really important to me. I want my rangefinder in a certain place. I want my knife in a certain place. I want my binos to fold out in a certain way. And with Alaska Guide Creations, they have a full line of binocular harnesses that you can make exactly how you want them. I can put different pockets right where it's going to work best for me and my system. Guys, Alaska Guide Creations is the best, hands down, in my opinion, harness you can get, and take it from a guy who pretty much lives in them. Go check out Alaska Guide Creations for your next and your last bino harness. Jim, I can't thank you enough, man. We got to get ready for an exciting awards banquet tonight. See some new world records introduced. Going to be a fun time. So thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah,
guys,
fantastic.
Thank you so much for listening. You guys have an absolute fantastic week, but don't buy into the dire wolf crap you're listening to on the internet.